Let's start, Christelle.
Sure. The floor is all yours.
But, welcome everybody to this webinar by Christelle. Where has my margin gone? Christelle and Michelle, we just want to welcome you today and thank you for your insights that you're going to share with us. This is an area of importance to us, particularly for people exporting, because it's very easy to not quite to misunderstand the terms that you're talking about, and if you do, then you could lose your margin or at least some of it. So welcome again to Christelle and Michelle. We've done this before, and this is an update on one we ran, I think, about 18 months, 2 years ago. And so there are some things that have happened. The world has changed dramatically in that time. So maybe if you could just go to the next slide. So this program, this what we call a learning event, is brought to you by the Entrepreneurs Program. It's a federal government program which is really just designed to help business do business better. And primarily we're representing the blue elements there: innovation connections, our specialist services, and business growth, where we help businesses that actually meet our eligibility criteria. So we help improve their productiveness and competitiveness. And really that's what this is about. This event has been designed to help improve your capability in terms of export. So I'm just going to hand over to Christelle now, and it's all yours, Christelle.
Thank you. So our goal today really is in this session, and we've done it before, but we're giving you an update because, as Ken said, so many things have changed in the meantime, in the recent month and in the last year. The goal is to give you the tools to enforce favorable trading terms. So imagine you're just starting to get traction into the European Union, you talk to distributors, you have potential leads, and wouldn't it be great if that process was just running smoothly, if you were growing your sales fast, and if your contracts included very favorable, profitable trading terms. So that's my goal for today, is to make sure you go away and you have clarity on how to negotiate, what to negotiate, and to have the tools to do it successfully. I have a guest today. I've invited Michel from Fracht to join me for his expertise in international logistics. Logistics and freight and Incoterms is an area that has encountered a lot of changes over the last 18 months. And so I thought Michel, as being one of the director of Fracht, which is a freight forwarder specialized, dealing with the global market, but has a very specific expertise with the European market. Michel has over 25 experience working in the international logistics and supply chain, both in Europe as well as in Australia. He's an expert at delivering successful project transport solution in challenging, oversized and heavy lift cargoes. He also has a skill in educating exporters and importers on how to minimize their risk and on the risk of their supply chain. So that's why he's here today, and he'll be he'll be presenting part of our framework today. Some of you know me, some of you don't know me. I have 20 years of business development experience in Europe, a track record in building sales with European multinationals on behalf of Australian scale-ups. And my business, the team and I in my business are managing about 75 international distributors at the moment. We have also experience in building and managing sales teams Europe-wide. So this is what we do. We focus on generating sales for our customers, taking them to their first million and beyond, working with European customers and distributors on behalf of our Australian clients. I'm also an author. The second book was awarded the Australian Best Business Book for Sales and Communication. It's called The 4 Steps to Generate Your First Million Euros in Sales. Some of you have it, some of you don't have it. If you don't have it, just send us a message, we'll send you one. And I'm working on my third book at the moment. We'll be talking about export stories from around the world. My background is that I worked for a very large multinational before starting Exportia, and I managed a portfolio of 40 million euros with large corporate banks, and I sold hardware, software service to them on behalf for IBM. Then I moved to Adelaide, where I started Exportia in 2006, and I've been working with Australian small businesses in the European market over the last 15 years. All right, so why are we sharing this today? Why are we doing this exercise? So bad negotiation with distributors or European clients result in a lack of knowledge about those trading terms, can result in a decreased margin. You can also have penalties to pay if you didn't know what you signed up with the distributor, for example. And you can also overlook some of the costs that are involved in selling. So it's very important to have some clarity around those terms. That's why we're doing this together today. We're going to spend 60 minutes on key elements, 10 key elements. At the end of the session, there will be a Q&A, but I strongly encourage you to ask your questions in the chat at any time during the session, and so that we can interact and make it as interactive and productive as possible. Don't wait till the end. And then if you have a more in-depth question you want to talk about, maybe we can do it in the end, but we have time for Q&A. So let me show you the framework we are going to talk about today. So what we're going to do is between element 1 to element 5, we're going to set the scene and explain to you the concepts. First, what are trading terms? After that, we're going to talk about recommended retail price, Incoterms. So that's where Michel is going to join me to talk about Incoterms. He is also going to cover the freight piece. And then we're going to talk about distribution price list, distributors price list. And then from 6 to 10, it is going to be a bit more of the strategic, how to negotiate and what to do, what to expect. Sorry about the background noise. If you hear that truck in the background, it's going away. So from 6 to 10, I was saying, then we're getting a little bit more strategic. It's a little bit more the flesh, the negotiation tips that I'm going to share with you. So let's set the scene. Trading terms. Has any one of you in the past struggled with trading terms? Has any one of you encountered some difficulties with the distributor when negotiating? Just put your hands up in the chat or some comments. Was there any specific reason why it was difficult, or if you guys want to put any comment in the chat about your experience, you know, it might be the price list that wasn't right. It might be some of the terms you weren't familiar. Yes, so I have Judy here saying that somebody was a client was asking CIF trading terms, 60 days payment terms. That's something that can be a bit hard for a small business to accept 60 days. It's a long payment term, right? So we are going to cover both topics. Anyone else frequently asked, requested exclusivity? Denise, you're right, especially in your sector, in the medical sector, it's a very, very frequent request. So we're gonna talk about how we can try to avoid that. Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing your experience. We are going to continue. So trading terms are legally binding. That means that if you are making an offer, even if it's an email, and you are sharing some price and some condition, it is legally binding, even though it's not a contract, like a 10-page contract. So we have to be very careful when we share our trading terms. So here are some of the elements. So what's important is really to indicate the currency. I know it sounds very basic, but it's good to always tick that box. Very commonly in Europe, you would have to have your price list in euros and then in pounds for Great Britain as well. So usually those two currencies would be enough. Validity is something you really, really have to have on your any pricing offer. It's something that sometimes get overlooked, and the buyers, the European buyers, they love it because they pull out an old offer they received in 1995 and they tell with no validity, and they tell you that that price is still valid, right? So you have to put a validity for your price offer. Give it 6 months or give it a year, but give it an end date, very important. Minimum order quantity is nice to have. Minimum order value, if it makes more sense for you to actually discuss that. You need to specify the Incoterm, and Michelle will go through that for you. Payment terms, it is important to specify it in advance. I've seen sometimes small business a bit worried to share payment terms and to enforce the better payment terms. You really have to push it. We're too small to actually accept long payment terms. We're going to talk about that a bit later. Delivery times, at least indicative one, and Michelle is going to touch on the impact of the current pandemic on international freight and delivery times. Indicative ones are important to be able to give a good picture of your overall condition and set the expectations. So this is a bit of a checklist for you. So do a bit of preparation work before you actually talk to a European client, particularly a distributor. So one of it is to actually know your harmonized system code. So each product has a code which is known to, it's a global code basically that describes your product. And in each country then, that code gives you the ability to know what is your import duty on your product. And it's good for you to set yourself in the shoes of your distributor, because your distributor will say, okay, I'm importing that pair of shoe from Australia. I better know how much import duty tax I'm going to have to pay. And therefore, I need the HS code. So sometimes I actually ask my clients to give me their HS code. And that's something that Michelle's business can help you with, to determine what is your product code if you don't know it. So I recommend to have your recommended retail price ready in euros as well. So the price at which you recommend a distributor to sell, it's only a recommendation, you don't impose it. Have in mind what distributor margin you are going to give. Have that ready. We're going to discuss that a bit later. And formalize your distribution offer or your distributor price list, depending on how you want to formalize it, and work out your estimated delivery times. At the moment, you may have to be a bit flexible there and give just an indication, and Michelle will help you there to define that. So in the follow-up email of this session, you will get a link from us where there is a database which is called Tarek, where you can check the product code. Otherwise, you can contact Michelle to find it out if any one of you is not aware of their product code. And if there's any questions so far on the overall concept of trading terms and on those terms, just feel free to put a comment on the chat box and we'll respond it as we go. So but feel very relaxed about it and just ask questions. Okay. All right, so the recommended retail price is the number 2 of our 10 elements. It's the second one. So the recommended retail price can be also called your list price or end user price. So it's a price at which your final end user of your product is going to buy your product at, and it's going to be also for a distributor the price at which you recommend them to sell your product. And usually you formalize it in euro, or you can also formalize it in British pounds, as often they would prefer that. And then for the rest of Europe, I would say that mostly people would, in the B2B sector, people would be accommodate with a European price list. Don't forget date of validity of this recommended retail price list always. And in a B2B context, formalize it excluding VAT, value added tax. So value added tax is the equivalent in Europe for GST. And so for that, you want to exclude it because VAT is different in every European country. It's slightly different. You may have 19%, 0.6 in one country, 20% in another country. So it's slightly different. So in B2B, so business to business, it's well accepted that you will formalize a recommended retail price excluding VAT. Makes your life easier. Okay, I see, can we mention, I have a question from Sanjay, can we mention late payment interest? Yes, you can mention it in your actual payment terms. I have actually a strategy which I quite like. Instead of late payment terms, when you're a small business, asking to pay late, asking a very large multinational to pay late payment interest, usually you will get a polite no. But what I like, I have a secret magic sentence that I add to the terms of conditions I work on with my customers, is usually I say that we reserve the right to change payment terms if we notice any late delivery terms. So someone pays late once, second time you ask for payment in advance, or third time you ask for payment in advance. This way you don't, and you block the shipment or the delivery of the solution if they don't pay in advance. So there's ways you can mitigate that risk. All right, 6 things to know about a recommended retail price list. So it's valid, make it valid Europe-wide to make your life easier. It can be public, make it easy to share. I think this is something at an initial discussion with the customer. If you have the end user price, it's an easy discussion to have. It doesn't reveal any of your distributor price list. It's not as confidential. So public price list is usually commonly shared. Keep any special condition, any special deal separate from it, right? It's usually something that we do with my clients. It also mitigates the risk of your distributor price list to be shared by mistake if you keep it separately. Things to know, another thing to know is if you have, so you have the validity that you indicate, okay, my price list Recommended retail price is valid until 31st of December. And then that means that when you want to increase it, you have to give notice of 90 days before you enforce the increase. Those 90 days it's a legal timeline. So if you don't respect, if you want to implement a price increase, make sure every single client, every end user, like big multinationals or a distributor, are informed 90 days before you actually implement the increase. Otherwise, they will refuse it. Okay, they need to have an update their system. They need a bit of time. So, and I can tell you, buyers will systematically check that you have given them the notice. Otherwise, they will refuse any price increase. As you know, it's like in Australia, you cannot impose your distributors to their end user price. You cannot say to a distributor, I want you to sell at that price. You can only recommend it to them. So that's a very important point and something you need to be very cautious about. So we are I'm going to hand over to you, Michelle, to talk about Incoterms. The floor is all yours. You tell me when I change the slides.
I will do. Thank you very much, Christelle. Just to give everyone a bit of background about myself, my name is Michelle Schäuble. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director of Fracht Australia. The Fracht Group is an international freight forwarding company with a head office in Switzerland. So there's the European link. We currently have about 120 offices in 42 countries and employ in excess of 1,500 staff worldwide. And while we specialize in the movement of freight, particularly heavy lift cargo and project cargo, our main objective is to educate and ensure we assist and advise our clients to successfully manage their supply chains, as well as associated transport and trade risks. Christelle's asked me to provide you an update on the latest edition of the Incoterms 2020, just as a follow-on from the previous webinar we've held, where we just quickly touched on the introduction of the Incoterms 2020. Well, they're in force now. At the same time, I would like to give everyone a bit of an overview of the challenges we are currently facing when moving freight. So you see the topics listed here. So I'll start off with a quick overview of what the Incoterms actually are, just for people who don't quite understand what they are, and then how they're applied, why they're important in international trade, and then we'll then move on to the differences between Incoterms 2020 and the previous edition 2010. And then, as Christelle said, the current situation in the freight market is absolutely crazy. So I'd just like to give everyone a bit of an update as to what's happening at the moment and what is going on. So yes, Incoterms. What are Incoterms? So Incoterms are basically the framework of international as well as domestic trade. So the Incoterms rules published by the International Chamber of Commerce are an internationally recognized standard which have become an essential part of allowing buyers and sellers to transact business while understanding all obligations concerning the tasks, costs, and risks involved in the delivery of goods. And the Incoterms have been incorporated in contracts for the sale of goods worldwide and provide rules and guidance to importers, exporters, lawyers, transporters, as well as insurers. If we're just going to go to the next slide, please, Christelle. So the Incoterms have first been published in 1936 by the International Chamber of Commerce, and the latest edition, the Incoterms 2020, are the 9th set of international contract terms, superseding the Incoterms 2010 edition. And the Incoterm 2020 defines 11 rules, which is exactly the same amount as was defined in the 2010 edition. And just to recap quickly, there's only a very few minor changes compared to the previous edition, which I will touch on a little bit more later on. If you could just move on to the next slide, please. So this matrix just gives you a visual overview of the Incoterms and the associated obligations of the buyer and seller when it comes to transport costs. The light blue areas represent the cost responsibilities of the seller, and show the transfer of costs and responsibilities to the buyer. So just to give you a few examples of what the abbreviations stand for and how the rules are described. So for example, the first one, EXW, stands for Ex Works, which means that the seller delivers when he places the goods at the disposal of the buyer at the seller's premises or at another named place. The seller does not need to load the goods on any collecting vehicle, nor does it need to clear the goods for export where such clearance is applicable. Just to give you an idea how these terms and rules are worded, and on the next page, we'll give you a bit more in-depth information about that as well. So just to sum up, so the first four Incoterms, Ex Works, FCA, FAS, and FOB are collect terms, which means that the main freight component is collected from the buyer and paid at destination. And the remaining Incoterms, CFR, CIF, CPT, CIP, DAP, DPU, and DDP are prepaid terms, which means that the freight component is prepaid by the seller at origin. And you can see that the Incoterms include insurance requirements as well. So for example, with CIF, which stands for Cost, Insurance and Freight, and CIP, which stands for Carriage and Insurance Paid to, the seller actually must contract for insurance cover against the buyer's risk of loss or damage to the goods during carriage. That's a very important point. If you just want to move on to the next slide, please, Crystal.
Ask you a question, Michelle.
Of course.
Can you tell me which one are more air freight and which one are more sea freight? Are there some Incoterms that are mostly used for sea freight and more?
There is some that are more used for sea freight. I mean, for example, FOB and FAS are sort of traditional, sea freight terms.
Yes.
However, in international trade, you can apply any term to any sort of transaction. The important part is that both the seller and the buyer agree. Yes. That's the most important part. I think it's really important to know, what you actually want, what your negotiation comes down to, and then you agree with the buyer or with the seller on an Incoterm. So they can then be applied to air freight or sea freight, as long as there is, an agreement between the buyer and the seller. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, and that needs to come quite early in the discussion, because otherwise there's a lot of information which is not clarified.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially when you talk about recommended retail price and price lists. If you sell on a CIF term, for example, you have to include freight and insurance in your pricing.
Yeah.
If you sell Ex Works, you don't, right? So you can be much more competitive with your recommended retail price if you specify this as Ex Works, for example.
Yeah. So we've got another question for you there from Denise. So does the freight company have to supply insurance if CIF? I mean, do you supply the insurance?
Generally, the freight forwarding company, and that's pretty much the rule with all freight forwarding companies and any freight you move, insurance is not included. So there's no insurance for your goods, and there is no insurance for any Incoterm requirements either. So the insurance is solely the responsibility of either the seller or the buyer. Okay. The freight forwarding company does have contacts insurance companies. So as a one-off, it's possible, but we would strongly recommend, and it's cheaper as well, to talk to your own insurance broker and organize a policy for marine insurance, because it's usually much cheaper, and you can sort of include it in your other policies as well. So it's important to cover that separately. Okay,
thank you.
No problem. As I said, promise, there's a few words here on this slide. So that's just a description of each of the Incoterms. And look, it can be very confusing, especially if you haven't sort of dealt with that before. So I'd really strongly recommend that you look at this together with an expert, with either your lawyers, your insurance brokers, or your freight forwarders, and really look at which Incoterms suit your individual needs. And it's also very important to understand that the point of transfer of responsibility for cost, risk, and insurance are not always the same. So they don't always transfer at the same point. And the risk transfer point, or the delivery point, is very important in relation to the marine insurance obligations, because the marine or the choice of Incoterm has a direct impact on the cargo insurance obligations, as we just quickly touched on before.
Yep.
You can just move on to the next one, please, Christelle. The differences between 2020 edition and the 2010 edition of Incoterms is really very small. There's only been one change to the actual Incoterms, which has been the DAT, or the delivered at terminal rule, which has been renamed DPU, or delivered at place unloaded. The obligations pretty much are the same, but I think the change was only because they wanted to move away from the word terminal and indicate that it really can be delivered at any place unloaded. So that gives you a bit more freedom. Again, it's important to specify that place. And you can do that by including, for example, the buyer's warehouse or their 3PL in Europe, for example, or their premises as well. So it gives you a bit more freedom.
Would you do that for every wouldn't you do that for every Incoterm, or include the actual address, like the city, ex-work, Sydney, Australia?
Absolutely. Look, I would recommend with any Incoterm to specify the named place, because it just avoids any confusion or arguments later on. Because you can then specify exactly what your price includes and where it's paid up to. And that can make a big difference, if it's unloaded at the terminal as compared to, for example, if you look at import freight, if it's unloaded somewhere in the western suburbs of Sydney, there's a big difference in cost. So it's very important, I agree, Christelle, to specify the named place with all Incoterms, really. Second point here, freight insurance, and I think that's just been touched on before. For the CIP rule, carriage and insurance paid to, the level of cover that is required to be organized by the seller has changed. So that's been upgraded to a higher level of cover. So that's quite important to discuss with your insurance broker to make sure when you sell on CIP rules that the cover is adequate to comply with the rules. The other clause, the CIF, which also includes insurance, doesn't have any change to its cover requirements.
Okay.
And then there's three other smaller items here where the FCA rule has opened up options to be used in conjunction with a letter of credit if that is ever required. There's also allowances to ensure that the Incoterms now cover where the buyer or seller use their own means of transport, if they have their own trucks, for example. And then there's a few points about security related obligations as well. You can move on to the next one, please, Christelle. So that brings me, to what does that mean to you, really? We're pretty much at the end of the Incoterms. So I've listed a few points in no particular order, which I believe are really worth considering when looking at Incoterms in general, but also when looking at implementing Incoterms 2020. And I'm not going into each of these. I'll leave you to read through them. But I think it's very important, again, to highlight that you need to refer to professional legal and sort of industry advice before making any decisions. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Christelle.
We might share those along with the definition of the Incoterms as a separate document for the attendees, if that's okay.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's fine. I think it's important to have a look at those points in detail because they might not apply to you, but they might, and it's important to consider them.
Yep.
Now, again, to the commercial application of Incoterms, do I really need to use Incoterms 2020 if all my contracts are already including Incoterms 2010, for example? And you don't. Really, the buyers and sellers have the freedom to do whatever suits them best. So they can refer to any trading edition of the Incoterms that they want. So if the 2010 edition has already been incorporated in all your existing contracts, there's absolutely no need to renegotiate or reissue all the other contracts. Again, as long as there is an agreement between the buyer and the seller as to what Incoterm is being used. And again, in the contracts, it's important to specify which edition of Incoterm is included. So you can't just say Incoterm, you have to specify Incoterms 2020 or Incoterms 2010.
Okay. Makes it
Yeah, that's it for Incoterms. So if you want to just move on to the next one, so that's just a bit of an overview and a snapshot of what we're doing when it comes to freight. So if you're involved in exporting or importing, I'm sure you're aware that there's been huge issues and huge challenges faced by the global forwarding and shipping industry. So if you want to just move on to the next one, please, Christelle.
Sure.
So basically, this I'd like to just give you a bit of an overview of what's been happening and what's been causing these issues, and also a few pointers as to what you can do to mitigate some of the risks. Really, the three issues, and it really boils down to three issues, is the lack of space, shortage of equipment, and increased freight rates. And I'm just going to quickly go into each of these points if I can. Let me just move on to the next slide, please.
Sure.
Let's start with lack of space. Obviously, with air freight, it's quite clear that there's hardly any passenger flights coming into Australia anymore or going out of Australia anymore. And the majority of air freight cargo is moved on passenger flights. So clearly, that's the issue. A lot of cargo is now moved on charter flights, and the rates have gone up massively. So we're thinking there is a small sort of shift in the outlook. We believe there's not going to be a massive change in the sort of space sector until international passenger aircrafts are being put back on. The next slide will show you a little bit about what's happening with sea freight. So the space issues are very similar to air freight. So at the beginning of the pandemic, the demand for transport was heavily reduced and shipping lines started cutting sailings. But then consumers started to order at unprecedented levels, and the global supply chain could just not keep up. And then we had further issues, with the Suez Canal blockage, as well as port or terminal closures in China, partly, in Yantian and Ningbo, and that's just added further to the issues. So until extra capacity is introduced, we don't really see any change to the current situation. And in both cases, it is really, really important to book space as early as possible. I'm talking, 6 to 8 weeks ahead before sailing or before an air freight departure, just to get the booking started, because at the moment it is really that bad. If you want to move on to the next one, please, Christelle.
Sure.
The next one is the shortage of equipment, and by equipment we're talking about containers, which is basically used in the sea freight. So that's only really affecting sea freight, and it's not really a shortage, but it's an imbalance of equipment. So what happened is that when China sort of closed shop when COVID first sort of broke out, shipping was completely halted, and all the containers that were on the way to the US and Europe and Australia, they never made it back. And at the same time, the empty containers that were sitting in China, supposed to be loaded for export, going to other parts of the country, they just sat there until sort of the industry started resuming trade, and that caused a huge imbalance of equipment. And we're still feeling the effects of that now, where sometimes, especially for special equipment like reefer containers, it's very, very hard to get in certain parts of the world.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the attendees today have come across some form or shape of shortages because of that, or so that's very relevant.
Yeah, it's widespread, and it affects importers and exporters as well.
Correct.
So the next issue we have is the rates. Okay, so I'm not sure, but if you have been importing or exporting, I'm sure you would have realized that the rates have gone up massively in the last sort of year. With air freight, they sort of stabilized a little bit. I mean, they were in double-digit figures per kilo at the height of COVID, and they're still way above COVID levels, but they've sort of stabilized. They've come down a little bit and stabilized a little bit. I don't think there's going to be any large-scale reduction in rates until international travel is resumed. I think that's going to be the big indicator of when rates potentially drop. When it comes to sea freight, there's really no end in sight. It's just going up and up and up. We've looked at the container indexes that are sort of published worldwide, and it's just ridiculous. And I'll show you in the following slides how that has changed. But on certain trade levels, the freight rates for a 20-foot container have gone over the $20,000 per container, just to give you a bit of an example. And that's mainly from the US or the Asia to the US trade. And it's absolutely crazy. So if you go on to the next slide, Christelle, it just shows you a little bit about what I just touched on, just to give you an idea of where the freight rates have been and where they are now. So that's measured from the 1st of August 2020 to the 20th of August 2021. And as you see, the average sort of rate are now hovering between around the $10,000 per container, which is, unprecedented, never happened before. And on the next slide, it just gives you a little bit of an idea of how the rates have increased this year versus last year, where they've been pretty flat. And then sort of this year, there's been an acceleration that hasn't stopped. There's been a quick dip, but they're sort of going back up again. And we see, notices about rate increases again and again. So every, couple of months, there's further increases that we're being notified of. So the next slide just gives you a bit of a indication of what's happening here. So, and the reason for this, it's basically simply that there's not enough supply, there's not enough capacity. And the shipping lines who were struggling to make profits a couple of years ago are just reporting record profits, never seen before. And you see there a little bit of a snapshot of what some carriers, profit comparisons, Q1 2020 versus Q1 2021, and it's ridiculous. And obviously all these costs are being passed on to importers and exporters and ultimately to the end consumer as well. And sort of as a freight forwarder in the middle, we don't have much choice but just to pass on increase after increase as well. And you're looking at sort of some Drewry reports. The World Container Index was 333% higher than the same week in 2020, just to give you a bit of an idea.
Yep.
The next slide, obviously that all sounds very grim and negative. There is a few things that you can do to plan ahead. So one of the things is to look at your supply chain models. Things like just in time just doesn't work anymore. You have to leave yourself enough time. And I think it will go back to a model where buyers have to hold more stock in their warehouses because of the volatility of the freight market. It's important to reach out to your freight forwarder, discuss space and rates for the trade lanes you're looking at and do that early enough. Book well in advance. As we said before, 4 to 6 weeks, if not more, is definitely the go at the moment. And then review your contracts and supply agreements, as Christelle touched on before. When you have fulfillment contracts that include delivery deadlines and potentially even liquidated damages for late deliveries, it's really important to give yourself enough time because sailings will be delayed. They will be bumped from vessel to vessel. So it's really important to give yourself a few extra weeks and don't cut it too narrow with the delivery timelines. Be flexible with how the goods are moved. If for you traditionally always move things via FCL, maybe there's another way of moving it. There might be an option on Ro-Ro carriers or anything like that. So talk to your freight forwarders about all these options. And lastly, allow for higher freight rates. As I said before, they've gone up like crazy. Especially if you're an exporter and you're selling on CIF terms or CFR terms, and you have to include the freight in your price. Make sure you build in a buffer because at the moment the rates are still going up and there's no end in sight.
Yeah, thank you. I think when we negotiate the distribution agreement or distribution offer, we just need to make sure that we don't get penalties for late deliveries because that's just not in our hand anymore as a manufacturer or we can't just rely on.
Very important.
Yes.
Yeah, very important because as you said, it's completely out of everyone's control. And if your container sits somewhere at a transshipment port, no matter what you do, it's not going to be loaded on an earlier vessel if there's no space.
Yes.
And that's unfortunately just the case at the moment, where a lot of these sailings are being missed, and containers are sitting in Singapore, for example, for quite a few weeks.
Yeah.
And that if you have sort of a deadline on your contracts, and worse, even penalties, that is, you know, a really bad position to be in.
Yep. Thank you.
Christelle,
Yes.
there's two questions here. I don't think they've been added. One just says, can you advise what you mean by be flexible with how goods are moved? I think that's what Michelle just said, but
Yes,
just elaborate on what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ken. Look, as I said before, traditionally you might be loading your cargo into full containers, FCL cargo. Because there's massive congestion now at the moment with FCL cargo, you might have to look at different options, such as splitting your cargo into smaller bits and send them as less than container cargo, for example, where co-loaders still have quite a bit of pull on getting weekly sailing. So you might have to split your shipment into 3, but get it shipped one lot every week. Or alternatively, you might have to look at options like RoRo, you know, the roll-on and roll-off ships that carry, you know, cars. If cargo is adequately packed and crated, there's no reason why this cargo can't be shipped on one of those vessels as well. So it's just keeping an open mind and looking at all different options of the transport modes, instead of just insisting on, you know, what you've done in the past. Is really, you know, the way to do it. And I think it's important to have an open conversation with the freight forwarder to advise you on what options are out there.
Yep.
And there's another question. I don't think you've answered this one. It says, can you elaborate again why we should not impose the final sales price to our distributors? So this was about recommended retail price, I think. If any just select their own price, it will be a messy market if I have different distributors in 2 countries, for instance.
Yes. So it's not actually legally, you cannot impose that sale price. This is not, it's like in Australia, you cannot impose that sale price to the distributor. However, and that's a free market. Basically, they make their offer, they decide on which margin they want to apply, and that's their decision. The only thing is they can't do price dumping, so they can't sell cheaper than what they bought it for. That's the only thing, but actually you cannot impose it to them. So yes, it is a bit messy, but it is a free market. And basically what you can do though is if you indicate the recommended retail price and you specify it, and then you you do your research on what, and I'm not sure who asked that question. If you can put your name, because you named Ken Long, and I know.
And it was Yasser.
Yasser, okay. Hi, Yasser. So what you need to know then is to simply know your distributor margin, what discount level you're going to give to them from the recommended retail price or from that list price, and it gives some kind of coherence, because most distributors, they don't want to sell too cheap either. They want to keep their margin. So if you give them that recommendation and you say, on that list price, I'm going to give you a discount level of 20% or 40%, and that's what we've observed for B2B. Mostly the discount level that are given to distributor, their margin. So that gives a bit of coherence, and but you can't really impose to them. Yeah, that's not legal. So some advice when you negotiate with your distributor and you build your distributor price list is don't give too much of a margin too soon. Don't give, so let's say if in Australia, you are actually giving a margin of 30% to your distributors, then don't go to Europe with something much lower. Make sure that people earn more margin points or more discounts based on how well they perform. It needs to be really linked to performance. It's very, very important to do so. I hope I responded to your question, Yasser, on that. Things to consider when you formalize your distribution offer. or your distributor price list, wherever format you wish to use. So as Michelle said, I'm looping back there, Incoterms must be specified. When you give a purchase price to a distributor, their purchase price, you need to tell them it is X Works Australia, Sydney. We've done that a lot for some of our customers. Or you can specify, if they say, no, I want a price with including the shipment to my warehouse, then in that case, you can say, okay, let's say your distributor has a warehouse in Frankfurt or in Belgium, and you would say, okay, delivery at place Brussels, Belgium. And that would be then how you specify and you do your pricing. You add that shipping cost to your pricing. Avoid, as an Australian company, avoid DDP, delivery duty paid, because it's very hard as a business based in Australia that doesn't have a subsidiary in Europe to claim the VAT back. Like it's feasible, but it's complicated. You don't want to use this Incoterm. For us, when we work with small business, when we start, before we help you achieve multi-million dollars, multi-million euro sales, when we start small, we push very hard for our small businesses to enforce X Works price to start. And because that de-risks your business. And then after that, as we build your sales and you negotiate with larger distributors, then we are actually being more flexible as you grow your revenue. And the good news is we've got a template for you that you are going to receive in the follow-up email from us. So that template is already available on our website, and it use it like a way to tick some boxes and make sure you haven't forgotten anything. Okay, so use it as a checklist. You can choose to formalize this price list or distribution offer in an email. It's fine too. And you can also choose to formalize it as a table. Things that you include are reference number of your product, part number, description, minimum order quantity if you have any, your purchase price, their purchase price, unit price, XV, and you indicate the Incoterm there, and then you can indicate as a list price equivalent just for them to see what's their discount level are. You can include below, have a paragraph on payment terms, the shipping delivery time estimated, and then you can add your HS code, your custom code. So you'll have that in an email coming to you as a follow-up along with the survey. So, okay, as I said earlier, when I think it was Judy who mentioned the 60-day, no, the late payments and the penalties, that was Sanjay, I think. So this is the magic sentence I use, Sanjay, there to protect a small business against bad payers. I usually add that sentence in the distribution offer. Payment terms are 30 days from invoice date, company X. So my company, if I'm called, I don't know, Christelle's business. So Christelle's business keeps the right to, or reserves the right to change payment terms in case of recurring late payments. Keep that freedom, and that's usually easily enforce that. So I don't know if there's any question on that, or if I should move on. Ken, do you see any question?
No, sorry.
Okay, all right, let's move on. So we've done the first half, and now we're going to be a bit more strategic. We're going to talk about number 6, distributor strategy, distribution agreements, what distributors ask for, what you can propose to negotiate, and then what could have gone wrong, but because you are in this webinar, you'll be perfect. You'll be a perfect negotiator. So we're going to resume and recap. Distribution strategy. So I can already see here in the background or medical sector people saying the European distributors always ask for exclusivity. I push very, very strongly against exclusivity. It's very risky for a small business to depend on just one distributor, especially when they are very large and they are very slow. They will take their time to generate sales. And if they don't perform, it might take you 2 years to get rid of them. So it's very risky for a small business. I systematically said, no, this is our policy worldwide, and we have no exclusivity nowhere. In Australia, we don't. In the US, we don't. In Europe, we don't. And I really push it. The reality is, when you are a small business, how can I say it politely? People don't care about you as much, right? So you can afford to say no because you are a small business. You're a small part of a very large distributor business. So you will not disturb their business by saying no to their request. So they tend to accept that you stand on your feet and that you say no to some of what their request is. So no to exclusivity is always my recommendation. Also, another thing is some distributors will often enforce, we would like to have exclusivity Europe-wide. And I have also an issue with that is, for example, very large distribution multinationals, whether they are large distributors in the dental sector, could be Henry Schein. In the lab sector, it could be Fisher Scientific. So very large American multinationals having global presence. They will ask you to have a European agreement to cover an exclusivity. The issue is the reality is each country, each team is not as dynamic and competent in every country. So you may be stuck with a Europe-wide agreement where people are not performing in, I don't know, in Italy, they're performing extremely well in Germany, and then they're not performing in Spain, they're performing well in the UK. It's a bit of a shame because it's a lost opportunity. If you had a non-exclusive agreement, you could add an additional Italian distributor into the mix to create some dynamic in the market. I like to have several distributors in the market, even at the start, to put 1 or 2 at least, just to create a bit of competitive tension between distributors. I find this is the best way to get a market started. When you start, it is important that people don't feel too comfortable about being by themselves in the market. All right, diverse range of distributors. I like to also have very big ones because they're important to a small business. They can potentially bring a lot of business, but I also have to have smaller ones. Large distributors have resisted very well I found with my discussion with European really large distributors, they tend to resist better this pandemic. Because they have a wider spread territory, they are across several industries, and therefore they did not suffer too much. So I like big distributors for that reason. I liked big distributors because they give you access to very large key accounts. Often, if I take the example of Clean Space in safety, they would have those distributors that they deal with, they would have a supply agreement, including different category of products for those key accounts. That's why I like to have those big distributors on board, because they're going to give me access to those key accounts. That's why I want to have them on board. But then I like to have my smaller agile distributors, which are very much easier to deal with. and they are doing a fantastic job. Your product is important to them. It's not like a very big distributors which has 100,000 products on their catalog. For a small distributor, your product is important. They're going to put some focus and some work in it. I've seen many times small distributor generate as much revenue as a bigger one. I've seen it over and over. So really, I think this is the right thing to do. What's important to know when you prepare your distribution offer is know the right milestones in terms of decisions. So for example, we used to have a client in the leisure industry, like in a recreational vehicle industry, in recreation. So there was the seasonal side of things where the distributor would launch their new products in September at the end of European summer. So you would have to finalize all the distributor pricing by June, July, make sure everything was then. So know for your industry, what's your distributor seasonality, okay? They need to have time to update the price on the system. Remember the 90 days notice, same. If you increase your prices, you need to notify them 90 days in advance. And also, for example, at the moment, we are discussing with European distributors for customers for 2022, for the pricing for 2022. We're preparing that. We're not even in September. We're already preparing that. We're going to send the pricing in October. 1st of October, the buyer is going to receive it for it to be enforced 1st of January. Calendar year is mainly what is used in Europe. Yeah, so yearly or bi-yearly pricing updates. To be honest, a yearly price increase is much more manageable. Bi-yearly, distributors will help you if you do that because it's very hard to manage for them. Okay, again, I have a template for you. If you'd like to define your ideal distributor profile, you can go through those this checklist and define what skills do they need, what profile do they need to have, what competitive product range should they carry or not carry, what complementary product to yours should they carry. That will help you to build your distribution strategy. Okay, let's move on to the next. I don't know if there's any questions so far there for me. Ken, have you seen anything popping up?
No, no more. I can see.
All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about distribution agreement. So often small business come to us and say, well, we're discussing with that distributor, do we need to, we don't have a distribution agreement, do we need to have one? So we usually, our clients usually don't have their own distributor agreement. They usually rely on the distributor to provide this. So as we said, specifying your trading terms is already legally binding. So it is just like having an agreement, okay? Although what I found is that distribution partners would have their own distribution agreement. What you can do is to ask them for the version in English. Even if they're a German, Italian distributor, they would have a version of that agreement in English for you. If you've never dealt with distribution agreement before, it's a good idea to get some legal advice to review that agreement. And some of the things that I find very useful as a trick is as well, when you negotiate, you sit down, nowadays you Zoom. You sit down on a Zoom with your distributor to negotiate the agreement. What you can do then is actually put on the column, if it's a German distributor, the German version and the English version. And this way you two can really follow each clause very, very nicely. So I've done that before. It's an easy thing to do. Know the clauses that are really important to your business. So for example, I have, you might want to have an extra protection around your IP, your intellectual property. I have one of my customers, they always had their own distribution agreement because they knew that some in their industry, some of their distributors tend to copy their product, have a cheap product made in China and try to copy their product. So nowadays they systematically added that clause into the distribution agreement, and they always chose to enforce their own distribution agreement. So that's a choice. We have also some clients who say, I do not want to deal into that specific industry. This is not our core business, or we don't have the, if you think about asbestos, some businesses in certain sectors say, we don't want to go into asbestos. It requires extra insurance policy, higher risk of litigation. So you can put that into the distribution agreement and say to the distributor, I do not want you to go into that field. So know what's important to you, and also note the things that have in the distribution agreement as you review it with your distributor. Note the things that are important internally in your business. So for example, this is an extract from an actual distribution agreement, a European one. And basically they tell you, if you don't send them an order, they send you an order. If you don't acknowledge it within 3 days, they will consider it as that you have accepted. So in your system, in your operations team needs to be aware of that. They need to open their eyes to when they receive an order. And if nothing is wrong with it, accept it. Otherwise, they need to quickly check that nothing is wrong with it, right? Okay, 2 legal points to remember when negotiating with distributors. 1, 90 days notice before the price increase. 2nd, you can't impose to them their selling price. Okay, few local rules may apply. The French have implemented a law so that the distributors cannot enforce more than 60 days of delivery of payment terms. So they cannot go beyond, and also all the distribution negotiation need to be finished by end of February. They can't go on and on and on for years. They have to be enforced by end of February. Okay, so what are they asking for, those distributors? So some of the things that they request sometime and that are okay to say no to as a small business, sometimes they ask you some specific marking on the products that you may not really, that you can easily say no to, because it's too much, it's an added cost, it's too much work, and it will decrease your margin and your profitability. So you can say no. We usually say no to return of unsold products. It's just too much of a hassle to return products back to Australia. You just want, if the distributor buy products, you just want them to sell it and commit to do so. Shipping to multiple locations instead of one specific warehouse, that's also very hard. Instead, you want to ship to a warehouse, one specific location, not to tens of little shops around the European country. It's going to cost you too much. You can also easily refuse penalties for late deliveries. As we said, and as Michelle said, at the moment, it is a must. You have to refuse so. So for example, delivery, this is an example of something you can say no to. Delivery shall be executed in accordance with our instructions at the risk of the supplier and free of all charges in respect of cost to the delivery address specified by us. Unless otherwise agreed, we shall be entitled to conduct a discount of 3%. So you can say no to that, because if they haven't specified clearly their delivery instructions to you, then you don't want to have to be imposed a discount of 3%. You don't want to do that. Remove that. Make it easy. Some distributors, especially the big ones, want to ask for more discount just for being a distributor. So they would ask for a margin, and then they would tell you, okay, I just would like to you grant them, let's say 30% margin, and then they come to you and say, because I perform the service of purchasing your good and selling it through my sales team, and I facilitate the marketing of your product, for that service, I need an extra 5%. So for me, that service is just being a distributor. So I typically say no for extra discount to those list of service. Again, that's a list of additional services they may ask. For me, all of that is just the act of being a distributor. So you can easily say no. Interestingly, we just had a discussion with Ken around corporate social responsibility and sustainability. Since the beginning of the year, end of last year, we've seen that distributors and large European corporates are more and more asking for your statement and your policy around corporate social responsibility. What do you do in your business to be socially responsible? And what do you do to be sustainable? How sustainable is your business? This is a new trend that we've seen recently, and I strongly recommend you to prepare for it. 9 out of 10, we're getting there. What can you propose to your distributor when you negotiate? You need to say yes to a few things, or you need to suggest things. So things that are really valuable for a small business is you can give them some extra discounts, but if you can do that if they reach a sales target. Like, what about if they reach 1 million, how many points can you give them? If this year they really push really hard, support your product. So that's the type of thing. If they achieve a sales growth, it's very well accepted to give extra points for a good growth. Maybe you want to target a specific industry, specific key accounts. And if they take you there, you can give them some extra points. Maybe you want them to be present at the number of trade shows and digital congresses. Maybe you want them to run campaigns. You can really support them by giving them a marketing budget on specific activities. So, and then once you've done that plan, they are your key performance indicators. You need to review with them at least quarterly, and that's often forgotten. All right, so make sure you review how they perform on a regular basis. You can also ask them for a better digital presence. Can they put the link of your website on theirs? Are they going to do campaign on their social media? Are they promote? So all those things are going to help your sales, and it's fine to actually pay for it, and it's got a value for you. It's going to help your sales. I also think that giving a discount on early payment is a great thing for small business. You want them to pay early though, not in 30 days. 30 days is not early payments. 30 days is normal payment. You want them to give you can give them a 2%, for example, on early payment if they pay upfront or if they pay within 10 days, something like that. You can give free shipment for large stock order, like several 100K orders or even smaller. You can also give them discounts when all the KPIs are met. Okay, so what could have gone wrong? So what we've done, if we say we're setting up KPIs to manage our distributors, we have added validity dates on our distribution terms and on our trading terms and on our recommended retail price, you are also going to monitor the progress and the performance of your distributors. That's what you do to avoid possible issues. Possible issues are, for example, a distributor wanting to discount in the market. Well, if they do so, what you can say is look at their performance, and at the time of the end of the validity of their trading terms, you renegotiate. But you cannot tell them you have discounted in the market, because you cannot impose their sale price. You use other ways, and you have other ways. You've set up some KPIs. You have your distributor price that you may want to increase for other reasons. It could be your cost increase. It could be that they haven't performed. It could be for a number of reasons. So that's why you want to manage your relationship. Being stuck with a distributor that has not performed, it takes a long time to move away from a distributor that does not perform when you have set them up exclusive. That's why we say no to that. I think everybody got that. And so you can now overcome all these issues because you have mitigated your risk. Because you have diversified your network of distributors. You have small ones, larger ones, and spread across different geographies as well to give you some flexibility. So let's look at the framework. Oops, before we move on to question. So trading terms, they include your price, the margin or the discount level, the currency, the Incoterm, indicative payment terms, indicative delivery times, and we're going to send you a template where you're going to have all the recap on those terms. We've looked at recommended retail price and user price list, which cannot be imposed and cannot only be increased with a 90 days notice. We looked at Incoterms with Michelle. We look at international freight, which has increased in terms of price, and where we need to really be aware of the flexibility we need to keep with international freight. We've looked at distributor price list, distribution strategy, distribution agreement, which we don't always have to have one. And we look at what they typically ask for. Also, what we've noted is there's a new trend around sustainability and corporate responsibility of businesses. They want European companies want their suppliers to be accountable for that. What you can propose, set up KPIs, monitor their performance. And because you've done all of this and you've attended this seminar, nothing will go wrong, everything, and you have the ways to rectify if there's any issue. So now imagine how good would that be to have a distribution network across Europe of a very diversified range of distributors that are performing extremely well for your business and that are applying profitable, favorable trading terms for you. So I think it's time for additional questions. Yes, so there is a recording of the session. The session is recorded and therefore the link will be sent to you. I just wonder if there's any question that have popped up during the session.
Christelle, I think there's a question there from Odie. How
Yes.
important is it to set the jurisdiction to Australia?
So how important is it to set the jurisdiction to Australia? So the reality is it depends, Odie, on the size of your, so enforce it if you can. If you have your own distribution agreement and you set the jurisdiction to Australia, just makes it easier. Imagine you have somebody copy your product and you have to fight for it in court. It just makes it so much easier to say that the court will be based in Australia. For a small business, makes it much easier. So you want to enforce that. The reality, though, is that it'll be very hard for you to enforce that with a very large distributor. They will refuse it. So in that case, you have to decide. What I usually recommend, and you can ask a lawyer as well, is to have a mediator before it goes to court. It's usually a good way, using a local chamber of commerce. Or maybe if you may want to establish that the court will be based in the UK for English. Maybe it will be easier for you if you're in front of a French court and you don't speak French. It might be a bit hard. So there's a few ways you can counteract to mitigate your risk. I can see Thomas as well. Can part of your trading terms include part of the percentage to the salesperson? So actually, Thomas, in terms of you cannot really impose that, how they pay, how a distributor, for example, pay their sales reps. You cannot really impose that. What you can do, though, is you can organize some campaigns and organize jointly with your distributor for them to then retribute their sales teams on an increased sale on your product. So you can say, okay, I'm distributor X, I'm giving you that allowance to run the campaign, a budget of 2,000 euro. And so then they run their own program for their reps, and the reps can get a 200 euro voucher. 10 reps can get 200 euro voucher if they sell your product, something like that. It's usually more what it is. You're not meaning, Thomas, is that responding to your question? I hope it is. I think it is.
Judy's asked the question, how can we find a sustainability consultant to help with the policy and CSR policy?
Yes, I know it's a tricky question. It's kind of an emerging ground. I have some of my clients which are currently undergoing this. So do you have anyone in your network, Ken?
Look, I just tell people to Google and you can usually find something and adapt yourself. It's not that hard, I don't think.
Yeah.
Look, I think for a sustainability policy, the best point is just start writing down the sorts of things you're doing. So it may be you're recycling, it may be you're selecting ingredients that have come from a sustainable source, etc. Just start writing down what you're doing and just research. You can usually, someone said they drafted one themselves. So,
yes.
Judy, if you send it to me, I'll have a read of it and give you some thoughts.
Yes, I think you should not. You should not be too bogged down with it. It's only a flag that it's really a new trend that distributors are asking for it, because themselves, as large companies, they have to they actually have to be accountable towards their government. So, but don't be too bogged down with it as a small business. As Ken say, if you start documenting what you're doing, it's a good start to do that.
Just quickly, Christelle, on that topic as well. And if you go into too much detail, it can become very expensive very quickly.
Yes.
If you hire an external consultant that will go through your business with a fine-tooth comb and find every sort of carbon footprint there is in your business, it can get very expensive very quickly.
Yes.
So as you said, I think it's important to start small and sort of look at the requirements as they come along, instead of going all out and spending a lot of money on this.
Yes.
The other thing to do, if you do have a target, and just check their website, they may have a sustainability policy as well.
Yes, correct. And so end of life of products. So if it's an electronic waste, there is usually your distributor should be, they are the importer in the market, so they have to actually collect at the end of life the product, and you can work with them. So because ultimately you are responsible for that recycling of your products at the end of their life. But the distributor can help you to ensure that that collection is organized for you. There are some third parties that are also able to organize that for you. I'm hoping this helps. Ask this before, yes, sir. Finding the right distributor for a service provider. We don't have a product, you provide a service. Yes, it is quite different in your case. So what you're looking at in your case, it's not an actual distributor that is going to ship your product, although you're also manufacturing something, but you're looking at people, multiplier that are going to refer people to you. So service providers may advise on a number of topics that you could use as your channel to the market, that can recommend you is a good way. And also it would really depend on what type of product you want to specifically focus on. But working with integrators sometimes and consulting large consulting groups or smaller specialized consulting groups is also like having a distribution strategy, because they're going to offer your manufacturing capabilities as a service to their client, and it's just one more product or one more service to their service offering. So it's, of course, it is not a product that you sell to them directly, but it is a service that you add to their range of services. So there's a bit, and you need to give them a margin on it. So you need to decide on that, and you need to see how you're going to motivate them, and you need to know which target market are they going to target on your behalf. You may want to be, I don't know, working with a business that is working in the aeronautics industry or in the metal industry or somewhere. So I think, do we have more?
No, I think that's all.
Through all the questions, I think. Yeah.
Look, Christelle, how about we wrap it up officially,
Yes.
but if people have questions that they can do so. So just letting everybody know that Christelle will be sharing the slides at the conclusion of this presentation, and also be sending you a link for to complete a survey just to help us to understand the value of this. Look, from my perspective, this stuff, it's almost scary. Just hearing what Michelle was saying about Incoterms and all those three-letter acronyms, it's just, I think it's just, you know, if you don't know what you're doing, you know, you just need to get advice. And, you know, I think the value of this is it helps you know what you don't know, and then, you know, at least you can be a bit more informed about it and go and get the appropriate advice, because I think there are some challenges there, and making, I think, one little wrong decision could be quite costly and, you know, have significant impacts, financial impacts for your business. So thank you, Christelle and Michelle. A lot of practical information. I love working with Christelle because she uses templates even. To me, that just shows people who have got a very organized mind. And I think, you know, that's something I really appreciate. Just something simple like that. So well done. And if you, all those who have attended, we really appreciate your attendance.
Thank you so much for having us, Ken.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Christelle.
Thank you, Michelle, for being our guest. Thanks
Anytime.
so much for your contribution. Thank you, everyone. I know you all overdosing with Zoom, so we really appreciate for